fool me once. Shame on you. If fool me, can't get fooled again.
One of the reasons that most of the Western world embraced unprecedented mass quarantines this spring was due to the work of a single man, a man you may not have heard of. He's a British academic called Neil Ferguson. Ferguson is a professor at a college in London, but he's also something of an international celebrity. He is best known for his dire predictions about pandemics. Ferguson seemed especially panicked by the Wuhan coronavirus. At one point, he suggested the coronavirus might be comparable to the Spanish flu of 1918, the pandemic that killed up to 100 million people. On February 28th of this year, as the disease spread throughout Europe, Ferguson publicly endorsed the Chinese model of quarantine specifically. Now keep in mind that as Ferguson spoke the words you're about to see, videos were circulating on the internet showing police in Wuhan throwing screaming citizens into the back of panel trucks and driving them to some unspecified internment somewhere. Ferguson must have known that the Chinese government's response in Wuhan was extreme and utterly inhumane. He endorsed it anyway.
How dare you?
These people are sick.
That's how serious Neil Ferguson was about this virus.
One has to adopt sort of community measures which have been adopted particularly in places like Wuhan and China, where you try to reduce contacts between people in the community. So the sorts of measures which are important are, first of all, if anybody has any sort of respiratory disease, cold, anything, stay at home until their symptoms are fully resolved.
Seems like kind of a reserved academic, and all of a sudden he's endorsing the Wuhan response. Leaders around the world paid attention to this. They took Ferguson's advice and locked down their entire populations. The British government asked Ferguson to help design its quarantines as a member of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergency, SAGE. Ferguson was happy to help shut down the entire United Kingdom, but it turns out he wasn't that interested at all in participating in it personally. Today, the Telegraph newspaper reported that Neil Ferguson ignored his own lockdowns. While the rest of London stayed trapped indoors, indeed the rest of the country, Ferguson repeatedly invited his married mistress over to his apartment for sex. And then perhaps most striking of all, he was infected with the coronavirus at the time.
What the hell you doing, bitch? You might have that fucking coronavirus.
These people are sick.
Neil Ferguson became sick and tested positive in mid-March. We know this because he said so publicly at the time. Not long after that, he invited his mistress over. By doing this, he exposed her to a deadly virus. He also exposed her husband and her children back home. When confronted today, Ferguson said this, quote, "I acted in the belief that I was immune." That was his explanation. The problem is, there is no scientific proof that that's true. Can someone who was sick a few weeks ago still transmit the coronavirus? We're not sure. For a famous scientist, Neil Ferguson is curiously ignorant of science. He's also, obviously, an appalling hypocrite, and he's not alone in that. So many of the people making our policies are like this. Almost compulsively, again and again, they do the very things they punish us for doing. When they're caught, they acknowledge no shame.
How dare you?
Shame on you.
They are entirely lacking in self-awareness. They have no idea how absurd they are. They discredit themselves without even realizing it. Almost immediately after telling the rest of New York City to stay inside, for example, Mayor Bill de Blasio loaded up his SUV with government bodyguards and headed for the gym across town in Brooklyn. A government spokesman later explained the trip was necessary because de Blasio's gym, quote, has been a huge part of his and his family's life. Oh, okay, that makes sense. De Blasio likes his gym, so he kept going there, despite telling you not to. Got it. Weeks later, de Blasio still couldn't stay out of Brooklyn for some reason. One day, he and his wife left their home in Manhattan, Gracie Mansion, and drove more than 10 miles to Prospect Park in Brooklyn for some sunshine and some fresh air. A stunned citizen happened to see the whole thing and videotaped it. Here's what happened.
Seriously, you guys have a park. You live in the middle of a park. You don't need to not essentially travel to Brooklyn. Come on, you won't even open roads for people of all backgrounds. I'm not going to give it a break. Like, this is selfish behavior. This is the epitome of non-essential travel.
Non-essential travel? What's that? When you make the rules, that's not even a category. Just ask Justin Trudeau, the preachy Prime Minister of Canada. On April 12th, Trudeau released a video commanding Canadians to stay in their homes for Easter. It's what Jesus would do, he declared.
So as we reflect on Jesus' message of love and compassion, let's think about our healthcare workers and essential service workers who are on the front lines every day. Let's put into practice what it truly means to love our neighbors as ourselves by making sacrifices to protect their health. Let's stay home for them.
That's the kind of quarantine Jesus endorses. Love means staying home. For you, not for them. Not long after recording the video you just saw, Trudeau left the capital and traveled all the way to Quebec to visit his family at their lake house, just like you'd want to do on Easter, if you were allowed to do that, but you're not allowed, so stop complaining.
What the hell you doing, bitch? You might have that fucking coronavirus.
You might also want to get your hair cut. People do, and in Chicago last month, that was not allowed. You couldn't get your hair cut. But the city's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, had her hair done anyway. When she was caught doing this, Lightfoot didn't even blush. Now, we played this clip for you on Friday's show, but it's one of those videos that no matter how many times you watch it, drops your jaw every time.
I'm the public face of this city. I'm on national media, and I'm out in the public eye. And you know, I'm a person who I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt like I needed to have a haircut. I'm not able to do that myself, and so I got a haircut.
These people are sick.
Got that? Shut up, trolls! I'm on national television! Chris Cuomo knows that feeling very well. Last month, the CNN anchor drove to a piece of property he owns in the Hamptons where apparently he's building a new weekend house. At the time, Cuomo was infected with the coronavirus and suffering from symptoms. He was supposed to be quarantined in total isolation in his basement full time. That's where he told his television audience he was. Night after night, Cuomo put on shows that revolved around his struggles with the illness and his virtuous, even selfless efforts to prevent others from getting infected with it. Given all the publicity he was generating for being sick, at least one Hamptons resident was shocked to see him out and about and confronted Cuomo about it. Cuomo responded by calling the man a, quote, jackass loser. The man's real name is David Whalen, and we invited him on the show to hear his story.
I just said, don't you have the coronavirus? Shouldn't you be quarantined? And I think his next words were, what the hell do you know about this? What do you know about the rules? And I said, you're not supposed to be out here. Nobody had gloves on. Nobody had masks on.
Oh, did you hear that detail? No gloves, no mask. An infected man circulating among an unsuspecting population.
What the hell you doing, bitch? You might have that fucking coronavirus.
When you watch television, you imagine Chris Cuomo is a responsible journalist. That's how he often describes himself. In fact, he's Typhoid Mary. And there's a vast gap between those two personas. For the average person, hypocrisy is the most embarrassing thing of all. Getting caught the way Chris Cuomo did would spur an existential crisis in most people. You might decide to devote the rest of your life to personal humility in response. You might move to Paraguay in shame and never speak in public again. But not Chris Cuomo. He didn't look back. He blamed the other guy and kept going. Cuomo was right there on television just last night, haranguing people for doing precisely what he did.
But there's also feel, fatigue. I've had it. Season's changing. It's getting warm. Want to get back to it. Look at these fools. Fools! I know they want to be out there. Fools! It's not about you. What about the other people? And look, I'm not going to castigate you. That's not my job. I'm not your daddy.
Fools! It's not about you, says the buff CNN anchor. Because if there's one thing in this world that Chris Cuomo just can't stand, it's narcissism. He hates it. It doesn't seem to occur to Chris Cuomo for a moment that he may be actually describing himself. It never occurs to any of these people. It's never one time occurred to Chris Cuomo's brother, the governor of New York. Andrew Cuomo just gave a pungent press briefing, as he so often does. Maybe you saw it. If not, watch this clip and tell us what you notice.
I think it's disrespectful of people not to wear masks. I mean, think about it. Do I think local government should be enforcing it? And should there be sanctions? Yes. Yes. Because it is a public health emergency. And I think there should be a penalty. Because you could literally kill someone. You could literally kill someone because you didn't want to wear a mask.
Hear that, Dumbo? You hard of hearing? Listen up. It's disrespectful. You could literally kill someone by not wearing a mask. Says the man not wearing a mask, who happens to be sitting next to other people who are not wearing masks.
These people are sick.
Do they hear themselves when they talk like this? On some level they do. They know they're hypocritical frauds, and that's exactly why they lecture you so hysterically. It makes them feel better. They probably suspect you know it too. It's just so obvious. They simply don't care enough about your opinion to bother with what you think. That's all of them. This would be infuriating if these people didn't run the world, but it's worse than that because they do. As we said at the top, maybe no single person has done more to lock down Western civilization than Professor Neil Ferguson of London. Novelist and former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson has followed Ferguson's career as closely as anyone has for months, and he joins us tonight to discuss Ferguson's legacy. Alex, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So, for viewers who aren't Oh, absolutely. It's our honor. Who aren't steeped in the recent history of Neil Ferguson, why should we care that he's a hypocrite?
Well, I mean, this is an incredibly important scientist in this. As you've said a couple of times correctly, he is probably the most important person in driving governments to implement these lockdowns. There was a New York Times story on March 17th, a front page story that highlighted Imperial College and mentioned him by name as having the ear of the British government and Boris Johnson. Just today, when he was forced to resign because he didn't follow his own rules, or the rules that the British government had put out, the Guardian said, again referred to how important he was. And there's no question he violated the lockdown, by the way. He said on March 18th, he tweeted that he had had symptoms of the coronavirus, and he met this woman on March 30th. That is not outside the 2-week limit. It's within the limit. There's no way around that. Now, one of the great ironies here is she said, oh, well, I thought of us as one household. Now, I don't know what her husband or children think of that.
So, the irony here is overwhelming, but at its root, it's a real person making these decisions, and I wonder, what does it tell you about what Neil Ferguson actually thinks? He not only violated the quarantines he espoused, but he exposed other people to the virus. What does it tell you?
So this is a great question, and with the way people behave, it suggests that they are much more aware of where the risks really are here. And we know, by the way, I'm getting sick of people saying we don't know that much about this virus, we don't know enough to know what the right steps are. Well, first of all, if that's true, why have we shut down the world? But second of all, we do know a lot about this virus, and we know that the average age of death in the United States and worldwide is probably about 80 or 82, and we know that about half, if not more, of the people who die in the United States are dying in nursing homes or are nursing home residents and long-term care residents. We know enough that we know we should protect those people, and instead our leaders are spending time haranguing us about masks and destroying the economy with lockdowns, and every day it makes less sense, and every day it's more infuriating, Tucker.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that some of the people espousing these measures, which are really warping and destroying in some cases our society, know that they're really not necessary.
Well, if they don't know, they're fools and haven't read the data, which is publicly available, which is available, on their own government websites. And if they do know, I just don't know what they're doing. And I honestly, you and I have talked a couple of times, and for a month I've been waiting for the reality of the data to start to hit people, and it's been very, very slow. Many states have these phased-in lockdown plans that have very, very unrealistic benchmarks. Oregon's benchmarks are crazy. New York's benchmarks, Illinois' benchmarks. Many of the blue state lockdown states have these benchmarks that are very, very difficult to meet. And I honestly, is it going to take people in the streets? That seemed to help a little bit in California last week. I don't know what it's going to take for people to start being realistic here. Not people, but lawmakers.
Well, that's right. Let me ask you one last question. You just said that about half of the deaths have taken place in long-term care and nursing homes, which is really sad. But it raises the obvious question, why aren't we going all in on protecting the people in long-term care and nursing homes? We're not at all.
That's a fantastic question. Why doesn't every nursing home get surveyed by a state every day right now? Why aren't the nursing homes being required to show staff plans that they're going to not let staff members, infect uninfected older people? Why isn't this the focus? There are things we could and should be doing, but when we're spending all our time, again, trying to scare people who are very low risk and very successfully, Tucker, one of the incredibly sad things about this is how many people won't go outside. They won't. I mean, they will not leave their homes. By doing that, we are doing exactly the wrong things. Look, I don't know. I don't make policy. All I can do is point out these hypocrisies, as you so brilliantly just did.
Alex Berenson, who would have won a Pulitzer this week if the system had been fair for your reporting on this, which has been really ahead of almost everyone. Great to see you tonight. Thank you for this.
Thanks, sir.
We've done a number of segments on this show about Tara Reade and her allegations against Joe Biden. We've told you about Biden's weird reaction to the charges. He stammered when asked. We told you at length about the infuriating, the sickening hypocrisy of the media and the professional feminist movement. Believe all women? No, they don't. It depends on the politics. But one thing we have not yet addressed in any detail is Reade's story itself. What exactly does she say happened between herself and Joe Biden? Is there any evidence to back it up? In retrospect, we probably should have started there, which is really at the beginning. So tonight we want to take you through the details of this story. Why? Because we think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it, and it's good to be grounded in what the facts are. And here they are. Tara Reade worked as an aide in Joe Biden's Senate office in Washington from December 1992 through August of 93. In a recent interview with a journalist called Katie Halper, Reade said that in the spring of 1993, she found herself alone with Joe Biden in an isolated corner of Capitol Hill. She later said it was in the basement of a Senate office building, but it was in the Senate somewhere. Biden, she said, pinned her against a wall, kissed her, and then reached up under her skirt and penetrated her with his fingers. It's horrifying. Reade recalls that she pulled away from Biden when he did this, and as she pulled away, he became angry. "You're nothing to me," she says Biden hissed at her.
How dare you?
Shame on you.
Reade says she complained to superiors about being harassed by Joe Biden, but didn't provide any of these horrifying details. A short time after she complained, she was fired. That's what she says. Now, did this happen? Did this assault in its particulars take place? Well, we can't really know for sure, of course. It was more than 25 years ago. But here's the evidence Reade points to support her case. Two unnamed friends of Reade's apparently have spoken to media outlets to say they heard Reade complain about harassment from Biden at the time. Reade's brother and a former neighbor also say they heard something about it. Then there's a recently unearthed CNN clip from 1993 in which an unnamed woman calls into Larry King Live and asks Larry King what her daughter could do about problems with the U.S. Senator.
San Luis Obispo, California. Hello.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Now, that clip just emerged. It was found by someone on Twitter, and it's a real clip. Reade says the woman you heard is her mother. We can't confirm that because her mother has since passed away, but the facts, at least in broad outline, seem to match. The caller identifies herself as being from San Luis Obispo. Reade's mother lived there at the time, and that seems compelling. We covered it on the show. But there is evidence on the other side as well, and we feel honor-bound to tell you about it. Just last year, Tara Reade told a very different story about what happened with Joe Biden. In 2019, She said he touched her inappropriately on the neck and shoulders. She said not that she was fired for complaining about harassment, much less being penetrated by Joe Biden. She then said she was fired because she refused to serve drinks at an event. And that was the version of the story that Reed's brother remembered when he was asked. Reed's brother told reporters that Reed had mentioned Biden touching her neck and shoulders. He did not mention anything about assault. Several days later, Reed's brother texted the reporters to say he also now remembered Reed saying that Biden had reached under her clothes and assaulted her. Then there's the question of Reed's politics. We normally wouldn't get into that because it's not germane. But keep in mind, this story is unfolding during a presidential campaign, and it's also playing out against the backdrop of fierce infighting within the Democratic Party. Infighting you may not know much about unless you're connected to the Democratic Party, but it's intense, and it's between establishment forces, the people who support Joe Biden and who are backing him in this election, and between the many Democrats who still support Bernie Sanders. Now, Tara Reid appears to be strongly in the Bernie Sanders camp. On March 3rd, Intercept reporter Ryan Grimm tweeted this, quote, "A head-to-head Biden versus Sanders contest will force voters to take a close look at Biden again. That went very badly for him last time." Now, to Grimm suggest that we be taking a close look at Joe Biden, she responded this way, "Yep, timing, wait for it, tick-tock." Well, that's cryptic. Was Tara Reid referring when she said tick-tock to her plans to announce the assault story? Suggesting it was politically timed? We don't know that. We have no evidence of it, but it's interesting and of course it's possible. It's notable that before Joe Biden started beating Bernie Sanders in the primary, Tara Reid wasn't attacking Joe Biden. Instead, she had effusively positive things to say about him. In 2017, Tara Reid repeatedly praised Joe Biden for his work against sexual assault. At one point, Reid wrote this, quote, "My old boss speaks the truth," end quote. She was liking comments that Biden had made saying he opposed the sexual assault of women. In retrospect, knowing all that we know now about what Reid says happened, statements like that are baffling. They are hard to understand or to explain. Now, as we learned so bitterly during the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, political imperatives sometimes influence claims like this. That does not mean that Tara Reid is some kind of liar or is a devious partisan. We don't know that is true, and we are not saying it now. To be clear, we are not asserting that. But the timing does mean, and this is our duty, that we ought to keep our guard up as this story progresses. Those of us who cover it going forward should be very wary of being used. Again, this is a presidential year. Weigh everything against the facts. Take nothing for granted. The one thing you can be certain of this year is you're being lied to. So that's what we know so far about the Tara Reid story. Those are the facts. Decide for yourself what you make of them. We'll be updating it regularly. If Joe Biden had to live by the same rules, and just right there, you know, it's hypothetical because they never live by their own rules, but let's say he did by the rules he imposed on male American college students, the allegations from his former staffer Tara Reid would have already ended his presidential campaign and his political career. But fortunately for Joe Biden, he does not need to live by those rules. He's exempted himself, so evidence will be needed to bring him from his perch. And by the way, that's fair. We're all for evidence. We're not Joe Biden. So far, though, nobody has even been allowed to look for the evidence. Secretary of the Senate says she lacks legal authority to search through Senate records for mentions of Tara Reid. Meanwhile, the University of Delaware, whose board, at least 8 of them are Joe Biden donors, refuses to release any of the Joe Biden documents in its possession, even though it is a public school taking tax dollars, housing public documents, presumably for the public's good. But no, They're not showing to you because they're on Team Biden and they don't have to. Paul Kamenar is counsel to the National Law and Policy Center. He drafted and filed a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, for Biden's donation agreement with the University of Delaware. He joins us tonight. Paul, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker. Good to be here.
Why this donation agreement? Tell us why that's a significant thing, why we should see that.
Well, we want to see everything regarding the transfer of 1,800 boxes of documents and a couple hundred gigabytes, or shall I say terabytes, of records from him, because the original agreement was that these should have been released on January 21st, 2019. Well, that came and gone. And what they did was amend that agreement and made it so that Biden would not be able to release these with the university until 2 years after public life, not public office. So they're actually doing this to give him time to run for the presidency without having to have these documents released. So the National Legal and Policy Center has filed an 8-page Freedom of Information request to not only get these documents, but to see who had access to it. Because we have information that Biden operatives actually went in the last several months and looked at these documents, and we don't know whether they pulled a Sandy Berger and absconded with some of the damaging documents or not. So we're asking for all records relating to the handling, curating, and disposition of these documents.
Fools. 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 Fools.
I spit upon your fire.
Fire up a bowl and accept your fate.
If fool men can't get fooled again.